It's WG, bring your SMB, and with the gauntlet locked out for the next season, let's talk about the one active PvP mode, and you could say also the most requested based on difficulty, and that is Crucible. How do you build teams in Crucible? How does everything else work? And the like. So let's start with the basics. 12-3 unlocks you Crucible, and you only want to do one very simple thing. Play a fight. Win or loss does not make a difference. The moment you hit the 12-3, you want to play a fight. And the reason you want to play a fight is so that you can rank in Freeman 2. Freeman 2 is the lowest difficulty, and Freeman 2 still gives you 400 arena coins an hour, which is just it's 10% less than what the number 1 ranked player gets. So get to Freeman 2 and you can then just chill. And the reason why you can chill is because for you, for the most part, it is not going to be relevant. The reason why it's not going to be relevant is because the moment you hit 12-3, you'll have what? One good gear set for like your main team. So for example, let's say you have 2 light armor sets, 2 medium armor sets, and a heavy armor set, right? And then it's already pretty much not worth it for you to focus on this piece of content because you have to build 3 teams. So basic requirement number 1 is get to 12-3, do your first fight, get your passive income, work towards Pavana, work towards these skill crystals and the like. That is the standard one. And then how the ranking system works is the longer you hold a position, the more you get these idle rewards, and then you can claim these idle rewards for points. And then at the end of the season, the one with the highest points matters for the ranking. So it's not about your rank that you have right now, but the rank you've been holding for the longest moment. But you can also get screwed out of points if you forget to collect your total rewards, which are in the same vein as your idle rewards. Alright, before we go any further, let's talk about arena basics and what I would like to refer to rock, paper, scissors. So let's start with Van Helsing. Van Helsing is by far the strongest arena unit. If you get his ultimate going, he'll pretty much annihilate. That is all you need to know about Van Helsing, and that is what he does. Then you have Bella. Bella is one of the most annoying tanks to face because of the fact that she can summon all these puppets. And her summoning these puppets is then what, for example, tanks the ultimates of other units, tanks the basic attacks, and even when your healer dies, a Bella can pretty much just run out the time if everything goes accordingly. And that is where Van Helsing comes in, because Van Helsing with his ultimate can keep his ult going by getting kills on Bella puppets. So Van Helsing beats Bella. Bella, on the other hand, as we already briefly talked about, pretty much beats any other DPS as long as she can summon her puppets, as long as she can keep that going. And then we have Augustine. Augustine in this case is more of like a fixed spot, but Augustine is the prime example. So what Augustine can do is he can counter every single marksman. So marksmen are those that are defined by having a talent signifying effective range, which means the closer the target is, the less damage they deal, the farther the target away, the more damage they deal. So with an Augustine, you can pull a Van Helsing into close combat range, negating the effective range and significantly lowering the damage potential, while also having the ability to pull him from in the enemy side of things into your own formation, and then making your units focused at Van Helsing. So, but this is also obviously assassins too, so something like a Harty, something like a Nicole, something like a Gilrain. So this is like the basics of arena, and the important part here is most of this only works for offense, or better said, you cannot really make it work in defense. If you run a Van Helsing in defense, someone on the offense can just use an Augustine to counter your Van Helsing, but in reverse, if someone has a Bella in their defense, you can just use a Van Helsing to counter their Bella by just shooting away the puppets. So this whole shenanigan is important for you doing and during offense, and also relevant for you to know what to not put in your defense. Because, for example, while an Augustine is great at pulling in Van Helsing in during your own offense, he won't ever be able to get that off defensively. And that is because why would anybody for free put their Van Helsing in the same lane as your defensive Augustine? So what this mainly should tell you is, if possible, and if you want to build the most annoying defense possible, then you do not use a Bella, you do not use an Assassin, and you also don't use a Van Helsing, or at least you don't use an Augustine. Assassins are still, you could say, fine, but they can just like make them avoid the rush charge, right? Alright, so now that you have the basics of arena shenanigans down, let's talk about offense first, and then I'll be giving you some defensive recommendations. Though keep in mind, offense is always easier than building a successful defense. So for this one, let's actually take on Mr. L. Bloom. You can see he has a total battle power of 240,000, we have like 221. But the most important part for offense is you don't have to beat all 3 fights. So what we are going to be doing here is we're going to be taking on Team 1, Team 2, and we're going to be skipping out on Team 3. The same will be true if we were to face this guy right here. You always skip out on the highest BP team, or better said, the team that looks the most scary. So for example, we would face Team 1, face Team 3, skip out on Team 2. And here another example, we can pick one of them to skip. Like for example, we don't want to fight against this team at the top because it has a lot of RNG and we can just counter Van Helsing. So we fight Team 2 and then we fight Team 3. So let's actually go in here and let's have a look how this looks properly in game. So in comparison to Arena, you could say this is even more random. And the reason why this is even more random is because you cannot set up the ult order. So the only thing you can do is build a proper formation, make sure you counter the enemy's lineup as best as possible, and then it's pretty much out of your hand. Yes, you can fail, but you can also win. So for example, what we're going to be doing here is obviously stopping the charge of the assassin. We have our Friedrich as our main tank, getting supported by Starry-Eyed Iona. The reason why we make that decision is because we don't have a Seth. If you don't have a Seth, then you want Bella as your tank for your other team, because Bella on her own can pretty much survive better than a Friedrich, and the synergy between a Friedrich and a Starry-Eyed Iona is really just what keeps you alive, unless you obviously have a T Amy. So right here what we're doing is we're pulling in Van Helsing to counter the effective range. We also hope that our Van Helsing will then kill his Van Helsing, and then from the rest on out it's pretty much out of our hands. But we can skew the values as much as possible in our favor. So for example, here we're starting off with the ult on Friedrich, as well as having everybody else focus on him. He'll get his support, he'll get his shield, and he'll pretty much be a big bullet sponge. You can see his Van Helsing ulted earlier, almost shredding our backline, and then together with the healing from Seth, it's not looking as good, but due to our Van Helsing then finally getting into gear, we can now pretty much from here on out start wiping them out. So you can see we to a degree had the advantage of making sure the Van Helsing has as least of a damage potential as possible. We had our tank to kind of take away the aggro. And then here we have Fight 2. So Fight 2, especially also going into team building for defense, is a pretty popular team, which just revolves around the summoners as a whole. Though I would say if this was a Starry-Eyed Iona, this probably would be a more scary defense, you could say, especially with them using Seth in the first one. So here the approach is again kind of simple. We have Bella to take away the aggro. We have Edina, who's our second strongest healer, because we don't have a Seth. Then we have our Lorelei, who will be able to provide the slow, or better said, provide the stacking sleep, as well as then also everything else we might need. We have our Lamia for some damage, and then we have a Daikalo. And so we go in. From here on out, it's pretty much again out of our hands. Who does Daikalo hit? Is it a puppet? Is it someone useful? You never know. And one of the reasons why Bella is so annoying, right? Because she is a prime sponge for enemy ultimates, or better said, your own ultimates too. I guess one of the disadvantages of this team would just have to be the fact that there's like not a dedicated healer. So this would be example number 1. And then let's just, and then for Fight 3, especially, no matter what the order is, I always like to do it like this. There really isn't a point, right? If you've won 2 fights, it's great. If you've already lost one, it's unrealistic for you to recover, because at this point we don't even have enough to make 2 good offensive teams. So I always like to just sacrifice a Kayn if I can, even though we didn't quite sacrifice a Kayn there. And then right here, let's just take on this formation again as another example. So we would have to this time go into fight 1. This is a fight we actually, for example, or better said, we did say we want to skip it. So we can just go in. We can just pick a random unit once more. So we're going to go with Kane again, put Kane in. And then as you see, we just sacrifice Kane right here because we'll have a higher chance at winning without having to use any real assets for this fight. This fight we've basically been given up on already. So right here once more we have an interesting situation where if you use a Van Helsing in your defense, make sure you put him in the second row. The reason why you want him in the second row is because like this we cannot Augustine counter him. So for example here we cannot just pull him because he only pulls the furthest unit, which is not going to be Van Helsing. So what we want to do here instead, I obviously cannot guarantee that it will work, but we're definitely going to be trying it, is we'll just be sending an assassin in his face, as well as then just go with the usual basic preparations so that at least the rest of the fight goes smoothly. Obviously we want to make sure that we don't place anyone in front of Van Helsing, so then looks something like this. So right here we'll be trying to go into the personal space of Van Helsing to reduce his actual damage, as well as then having the rest of our units positioned properly. As usual, offense is easier than defense, and that is mostly what it is going to be and what it's going to stay like. Here's also quite important, you can get screwed over by RNG, right? Like, does the enemy Van Helsing start ulting first? Does your Van Helsing start ulting first? Who gets targeted? Like for example, you see right here, we are kind of screwed in that our Gilrain gets shot right there, but we did, you could say, bait out the Seth ult, or the Seth ult, right? The Seth ult came before we actually started dealing any damage, so there's a lot of RNG factors going into this, though you can, as we've talked about before, shift things in your favor. So for example, right here we don't have any ranged units, so there's no need for us to pull anyone or to pull any shenanigans, which also means this fight is for the most part just out of our hands. We're going to bring our strongest units. We can also make sure that nobody relevant gets pulled. So for example, we could let a Bella get pulled in, which would be totally fine. And then right here we just see how the fight turns out. So yeah, obviously our Lamia, that's not how it usually goes. But yeah, you've seen the Siren stacks from Lorelei. But yeah, offense is offense, right? Alright, now for the defensive part of this video, let's try to build some defenses together. You've obviously had some inspiration from the offensive side of things, but yeah, you might be able to take something else away. Usually it is not a good idea to place your standard assassin like Augustine, because why should they just put someone in his way unless it's in their favor? Let's actually move myself over here, should be better. Then the same is kind of true for other assassins besides Lorelei. Lorelei starts out as like a ranged mage, so she's fine, but someone like, for example, a Gilrain would just rush into the enemy formation. Why would they put something in front here that actually wants to get hit? Same is kind of true with like a Nicole. You could try an offensive mass, but the only reason you would try an or defensive mass is because you're looking for pure mayhem, pure chaos, and pure RNG. That is also one of the components of what we just want to go over first, I guess, which is going to be the sleep comp. So for the sleep comp, you'll just be trying to build your team as defensively as reasonably possible. So that looks then something like us, for example, bringing in a Bella, bringing in an Edina, bringing in a Seth, or bringing a Steroid Iona if you have her, right? Any of those three are your prime target healers. Don't even really bother trying to build a proper defense with Iona. It just doesn't end well. So for example then, so that we have it for our second defense, our defense would look something like this, with like a sleep core to annoy the enemies, and then potentially let's see, for example, something like this, and then potentially a Van Helsing as kind of like your finish off Full Moon, or something like a Lamia, or I guess even a Noah can work here really well. Then with a little addition to this, you could also take out the sleep aspects and build the summoner team we've talked about, which would look something like this. You have a Caesar, you have a Noah, you have a Bella, you have your healer, and then for your last spot, you can then once again introduce, for example, something like a Lamia for the lifesteal, something to protect Noah from getting pulled. Noah in the second row, again, can also work somewhat well because you can then not let him get pulled with an Augustine. So this is like the summoner base. If you have a Bella here, obviously it allows Noah to get his summons faster so that he can deal more damage. And also Bella interacts well with Cecia, where she can then get some nasty, nasty abilities off. So that's kind of like the summoner side of things. Something that hasn't really been tried, I gotta be honest with you, here would be a shock-based, a stun/shock-based defense. It's most likely just, I don't think many people have focused on these heroes yet, and they should also not really be built, but there should be viability in having, for example, a Joanne plus a extra tank. The reason why you go for the extra tank is so that Joanne just doesn't get shredded on her own, and then you kind of just fill this up with, for example, a Steroid Iona to provide the passive shields to Joanne. So here you would, for example, have the synergy of every single stun that happens also translating into an extra shot from your Triss, as well as also making the ultimate of your Selena more powerful. And then the synergies between these extra stuns can work quite well, but I'm gonna be honest with you, that is a bit untested territory. And then the really, like the nastiest defenses kind of come down to combining two factors. And that is, if you have a Seth and a T Amy, throw those in the defense and you're already making your opponent's life hell, right? What you can also try is like full turtle strat, which would involve, for example, a Friedrich, a T Amy, a Seth, and then let's say a Lamia. And the reason why I can't show you those is because I obviously don't have them, but you can imagine them, right? Like just imagine them like this. And then what you would have here is pretty much a team that plays for time. The only purpose for this team right here is to survive out the 2 minutes. If they can't beat your defense, they cannot beat you. And the reason why we're not using a Bella in here is because we're trying to avoid as many vulnerabilities as possible. So not giving them the opportunity to just use a Van Helsing to start shredding our units kind of already narrows it down. And then in the double healing with Seth and Steroid, as well as some punchback power in a Lamia, can work quite well. Obviously, you could try some other high moons, like for example a Tihati. Though a bit of an issue with Tihati is she's a bit vulnerable, and if she doesn't get like dedicated support, she's most likely going to die somewhere through reducing your blood soul recovery. And then someone else you could be trying if you're looking for a let me see, was it actually full moon? Yeah, if you're looking for a full moon, would be Otavia. Otavia is actually surprisingly strong. When she falls below 50%, she becomes untargetable and gains 60% lifesteal. So she'll be able to like heal herself back up to what would that be, like 60, 70, 80, 90%. So having Otavia as like an additional force of survivability and some damage in there could also be quite nasty. But yeah, outside of that, it's like these standard strategies. If you do use a Van Helsing in your defense, which is totally fine, just make sure you don't use him in the middle row and have someone placed behind him so that that unit can actually get pulled instead of your Van Helsing. And then you can, for example, pair it with a defense that looks something like this. But keep in mind, your defenses are way less likely to be successful than your offenses. And as long as you win your offenses, you'll be able to like hold your rank in wherever you're meant to be to a degree. And yeah, the more randomness, the more randomness you can add into a fight, the better. The more tankiness or towards tankiness you can go, the better, because it's always easier to counter an enemy's offensive strategies than it is to counter an enemy's defensive strategies, because the only thing you can do is just deal more damage. Yeah, are there any other standouts we kind of need to talk about? Yeah, obviously Queen of RNG, right? We've briefly mentioned her. If you want to put a mass in your defense, feel free to try. Might go really well, might go horribly wrong. It is heavily dependent on fate smiling upon you. And then also Dal Carlo, right? Dalcalo is also a prime target to do some shenanigans. If those morphs land at the right time or on the right heroes, they can be game deciding. Like for example, if an acapella ults and then she gets morphed after like a second or so of her ult, or if you morph someone before they're able to heal and then kill their team, as I said, right, like RNG based defenses that can go your way, can go the enemy's way, tend to be more successful. So I hope this gave you an idea on how to tackle Crucible as a whole. In general, if you don't yet have 3 teams, don't bother with it. Make sure in your defenses you focus on 2 defenses rather than 3, because as long as they cannot be 2 of your teams, you'll be fine. So most likely they, for example, skip the strongest team and then they still have to beat your second strongest. So make sure you focus on 2 teams and then your third one is kind of whatever-ish, you could say. Hope that helps. Peace!